On the morning I was supposed to get married, I woke on the floor of Magnolia House, with half my hair scattered across the white tiles. For several seconds, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Dark strands lay beside my cheek. Some were long enough to curl against the grout. Others had been hacked so close to the scalp that they looked like coarse black dust. My mouth tasted bitter. My tongue felt too large. When I tried to push myself upright, the room tilted sideways, and the brass handle of the dressing room cabinet seemed to split into two. My phone was gone. The clock above the vanity said 6:14 a.m. Our wedding ceremony was scheduled for 11:30. I reached for the edge of the counter and felt an empty patch above my left ear, then another behind it. Whoever had cut my hair had not tried to make it neat. They had cut until there was nothing left to ruin. A pair of silver dressmaking scissors rested beside the sink. I did not touch them. There was a telephone mounted on the wall near the linen cupboard. I crawled to it, pulled myself upright by the shelf, and called Noah's hotel room. He answered on the first ring. Claire? My throat scraped when I spoke. Come to the small dressing room beside the east garden. What happened? I don't know yet. I pressed my wrist against the counter to stop my hand from shaking. Call 911 before you leave. Tell them I'm conscious, disoriented, and may have been given something without my knowledge. There was one hard breath on the line. Then Noah said, I'm calling now. Don't confront anyone. Claire. Please. And check the gray box. It should still be in the hotel safe. He went silent for half a second. I'll check it. Do not open it. Photograph the seal with the manager present. I understand. That was why I had called him, before calling anyone in my family. Noah knew the difference between protecting me and taking control away from me. 23 minutes later, paramedics wheeled me through the side entrance of Magnolia House, while florists carried white roses through the front. I heard the wedding coordinator arguing with someone in the courtyard. A quartet was testing the same 8 bars of music over and over, unaware that there might not be a ceremony to play. Noah walked beside the stretcher. His face was pale, and his hands were clenched so tightly that the knuckles had lost their color. He never asked me to cancel the meeting. He asked, "What do you need me to do next?" "Make sure no one cleans that room." I told the front desk manager. She locked the corridor and is waiting for the police. The gray box? Still sealed. I took a photograph through the safe door with the hotel manager standing beside me. Only then did I close my eyes. At the emergency department, I repeated the same sentence 3 times. I did not know what had happened. I would not guess what substance might have been involved, and I wanted every uncertain detail recorded as uncertain. The nurse documented my condition. Samples were taken. My clothing was handled according to hospital procedure, rather than folded into a bag by Noah or me. A Savannah police officer took a preliminary statement while a victim advocate sat close enough for me to see her without turning my head. I gave the officer the fragments I could remember. My mother offering me tea. My sister, Vanessa, standing near the dressing room door. My younger sister Erin crying. The metallic sound of scissors. A woman's voice saying I could not appear in the morning looking like the perfect victim. I could not swear which sister had said it. I refused to improve the memory, just because the truth sounded incomplete. The officer gave me a case number and explained that a fuller statement could wait until my doctor approved it. Hospital security was notified that no member of my family was to enter the consultation wing. By 7:45, the physician had confirmed that I was alert, understood the decisions in front of me, and could participate in a limited video conference if I remained under observation. You can stop at any time, the victim advocate reminded me. I know. And no one can make you continue. I know that too. Noah returned from the hotel with my navy blazer, a dark headscarf, and the gray document box. The tamper seal was intact. He placed his phone beside it and showed me the photographs. The safe before opening, the hotel manager holding the access log, the unbroken seal, and the time the box had been removed. He had done exactly what I asked. An hour later, I sat in a private hospital consultation room, with the camera framed from my shoulders upward. The scarf concealed most of the damage. Makeup could not erase the exhaustion beneath my eyes, but I looked awake, deliberate and professional. Noah stood beside the door, outside the camera's view. His phone displayed 4 numbers: the nursing station, hospital security, the police officer assigned to the report, and the civil attorney I had consulted earlier that week. We had agreed on a signal. If I placed 2 fingers against the edge of the table, he would end the call and summon help. I set the gray box in front of the camera. The encrypted connection opened. My father appeared first, seated in Magnolia House's library. My mother sat beside him. Erin stood in the background, twisting a paper napkin between her fingers. Vanessa joined last. She glanced at the scarf around my head. Then she looked down at the gray box. The color left her face. That was the moment I knew my sister still believed the only thing capable of destroying her was inside that box. She was wrong. The box held paper. What could destroy her was the history she had failed to erase. 11 months earlier, at Vanessa's wedding, my younger sister had ripped a crutch out of my hand before 200 guests. And my entire family had laughed before they realized the cameras were still recording. Magnolia House stood in Savannah's historic district. 3 stories of pale stucco, iron balconies, and carefully marketed Southern charm. My parents called it our family legacy. For most of my life, legacy had meant a problem I was expected to solve without being given any authority to prevent it. At 44, I was a senior facilities risk manager at a university in Atlanta. I evaluated buildings, documented hazards, and designed systems that made it difficult for people to hide the decisions that caused preventable failures. At Magnolia House, that expertise made me useful. It had never made me equal. By the afternoon of Vanessa's wedding, I had already checked the temporary ramps, confirmed that the garden exit had not been blocked by catering tables, and asked an employee to remove a decorative arrangement from a fire extinguisher cabinet. I was 11 weeks out from my second surgery. My physician had told me to limit prolonged standing and continue using a forearm crutch until my gait stabilized. Vanessa knew that. My parents knew it too. They still assigned me to inspect the guest routes because, as my mother said, "You're the only one who notices these little things." Vanessa was the only one who received credit when an event ran smoothly. I was the one blamed whenever noticing a little thing made someone uncomfortable. The reception had begun when Erin approached me near the foot of the main staircase. She was 32, dressed in pale green silk and already flushed from champagne. "You're still carrying that thing?" she asked. "It's not a handbag, Erin. You walked without it during the photographs." "I stood without it for 12 seconds. She smiled towards someone behind me. I turned slightly and saw the wedding videographer moving closer. His camera shifted from the dance floor to the staircase. I assumed Vanessa wanted footage of the bouquet toss. That was my first mistake. Erin wrapped her fingers around the shaft of my crutch. "Let go." She laughed. "Everyone knows you don't need this anymore." I said, "Let go. Stop pretending to be helpless." She pulled. The crutch left my hand before I could shift my weight. My right leg buckled. I reached for the stair rail, but my fingers closed around empty air. My hip struck the edge of the lowest step, and the impact drove the breath out of my body. 100 conversations collapsed into silence. The hem of my dress had twisted above my knee. The long surgical scar along my thigh and hip was visible beneath the displaced fabric. My first instinct was not anger. It was shame. I reached down to cover the scar, as though I had done something indecent, by allowing the room to see what recovery actually looked like. A man in a dark suit crossed the floor before anyone in my family moved. Dr. Thomas Mercer, the groom's father, had retired after decades in rehabilitation medicine. He knelt beside me, but did not touch me until I nodded. "Can you move your ankle?" "Yes." "Any new pain in your back?" "No, hip and thigh." He looked at the crutch lying several feet away, then at the altered way I was holding my right leg. "You are still underweight, bearing restrictions." It was not a question. "Yes." "Who told these people you no longer required support?" No one answered. Thomas helped me sit upright. When my dress shifted again, he saw the length of the scar. His expression changed. Not into pity, into recognition. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. Across the room, Vanessa's face went white. The quartet stopped playing in the middle of a note. My mother hurried forward. Thomas, please. Claire had an accident last year. She's always been unsteady when she's overtired. The sentence landed too smoothly. I had heard versions of it from my father, Vanessa, and Aaron. Claire had been drinking. Claire was upset. Claire lost her balance. Claire was always unsteady under stress. 4 people using the same explanation did not make it true. It only meant they had rehearsed it. Aaron retrieved my crutch and tried to hand it to Thomas. I held out my own hand. Give it to me. Her smile disappeared. I was joking. Give it back. Claire. Don't ruin Vanessa's. My crutch. Now. For once, my voice carried farther than my mother's. Aaron placed it in my palm. Thomas helped me stand, but I controlled the movement. I tested my weight, positioned the cuff around my arm, and walked away at the pace my body allowed. No apology. No reassurance to the guests. No promise that I was fine so Vanessa's reception could continue untouched. As I passed the video station, I heard Vanessa behind me. Don't use that footage. She did not ask whether I was hurt. She asked whether anyone had recorded it. I should have understood then what mattered most to her. But I still wanted to believe that cruelty in my family was impulsive rather than organized. I still believed there was a difference between people who protected a lie and people who had built one. 12 days before my own wedding, an email arrived that destroyed that distinction. I had begun 2 weeks of approved wedding leave and driven from Atlanta to Savannah the previous afternoon. Noah and I were staying at a hotel several blocks from Magnolia House because I no longer trusted the privacy of any room beneath my parents' roof. The message came from a representative of the company conducting due diligence for the prospective buyer of Magnolia House. The property was under contract. The buyer was reviewing structural conditions, fire and life safety systems, accessibility records, insurance history, and unresolved incidents before closing. The attached report was titled, Post-Incident Life Safety Review Magnolia House. Beneath it appeared my name, Claire Bennett, Senior Facilities Risk Manager. For several seconds, I stared at the screen without opening the file. My job title belonged to the university. I had never been hired by Magnolia House. I had never conducted a post-incident review of the property. The buyer's representative wrote that the report had been uploaded to the transaction data room and asked me to confirm that it was authentic. Noah was reading at the small table near the window when I said his name. He looked up immediately. What happened? Someone used my title. He came closer, but stopped before touching the laptop. Do you want me to look? Not yet. I opened the report. It claimed that I had inspected the main staircase before my fall, found no material defect, and concluded that the incident was caused by individual loss of balance unrelated to facility condition. My family had not merely told people I was drunk or unstable. They had used my professional identity to make the lie look like an expert conclusion. I did not call my mother. I did not call Vanessa. At 10:17 a.m., I sent a written response to the buyer's representative. I stated that I had not performed the inspection, had not authored or approved the report, and had not permitted my university title to be used in connection with Magnolia House. I instructed the recipient not to rely on the document until its origin could be verified and requested that every version, upload record, and item of metadata be preserved. Then, I informed my supervisor and the university compliance office. I explained that I was on approved personal leave, that I was not acting on behalf of the university, and that my title appeared to have been used to support a private family asset. My colleague Maya Chen called 20 minutes later. You did the right thing by reporting it immediately, she said. The conflict issue is not that Magnolia House belongs to your parents. The problem is that someone made it appear the university's risk manager endorsed their building. What if they claim I gave informal advice? Informal advice is not the report you're describing. Do not argue with them by phone. Stop reliance, preserve the file, document your notice, and separate what you know from what you suspect. If I hadn't reported it? There was a brief silence. Then someone could ask whether you allowed your public role to be used for a private transaction. Even if you didn't create the document, silence after discovering it could damage the university's trust in you. I looked at the wedding dress, hanging inside the hotel wardrobe. My mother had promised that if I stopped digging up the past, I could marry in the Magnolia House garden without paying the venue fee. For years, my family had trained me to treat belonging as something they could withdraw whenever I asked the wrong question. This time, remaining silent could cost me the career I had built without them. "I'm not withdrawing the notice," I said. "I didn't think you would." 5 minutes after my preservation request went out, my mother called. She did not ask what document I had received. She said, "Who at the buyer's company sent that to you?" I stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. That question told me she already knew what I had seen. The first technical contradiction was waiting in the footer. Revision 4,2. I had created that version of my general risk reporting template 3 months after my accident. A document dated before the fall could not have been produced using a format that did not yet exist. The report was not mistaken. It was temporally impossible. 9 months earlier, my mother had asked me to send her a modern safety report sample because Magnolia House's insurer wanted clearer sections on accessibility and temporary controls. I had removed the university name, stripped out all site data, and sent her a blank Word template for reference. My mother had replied, "Vanessa needs the version with all the newer sections." I had believed they were trying to improve their records. Now my blank template had become the costume worn by a fabricated inspection. I opened the file properties. The creation date was later than my accident. The visible date on the first page had been changed. The author field still read, Vanessa Mercier. I called Maya and shared my screen. "The footer establishes that the template came later," I said. "The properties connect Vanessa to this file. They connect her to creating or saving this version," Maya corrected gently. "That is strong. But don't call it proof of the entire scheme yet." "I know. You sound disappointed. I'm trying not to sound furious. That's different." I copied the metadata into my evidence log, exported the information as a read-only file, and noted the method I had used. Then I wrote one sentence in large letters at the top of my notebook. "A blank template is not consent." That afternoon, I sent my mother and Vanessa a written notice. No one was permitted to use my name, title, or documents without specific written authorization for each purpose. Vanessa replied 12 minutes later, "You're making a clerical mistake look criminal because you're still angry about the stairs." I did not respond. The report was already speaking more clearly than she was. Calvin Reed had served as Magnolia House's head of maintenance until 6 months after my fall. I located him through a public professional directory and asked whether he would meet me in a coffee shop near Forsyth Park. I did not ask whether Vanessa had forged anything. I asked how Magnolia House numbered work orders, who could defer a repair, and what the status codes meant. Calvin placed a worn paper folder on the table. "I kept this because they blamed me after I left," he said. "It's not their original file. It's the copy I used to reconcile open work before my final week." "That distinction matters," I said. He gave me a cautious look. "You always talked like that?" "Only when people expected paperwork to lie for them." The folder contained 3 maintenance requests concerning the main stair rail. The first noted movement at the wall bracket. The second described loosened anchors. The third recommended closing the staircase until the connection could be repaired. All 3 had been created in the 6 weeks before my fall. 2 were marked deferred by operations. "Who was operations?" I asked. "Vanessa." "Who could approve the spending?" "Your father." A handwritten note appeared beside the last request. "Owner notified." I tapped the line. "Who did owner mean under your procedure?" "Robert Bennett." "My father personally?" "Unless ownership changed without anyone telling me." I photographed the pages with Calvin's permission, recorded the date and source, and asked whether a vendor could independently confirm when replacement materials had been ordered. Calvin gave me the supplier's name. "You believe me?" he asked. "I believe this paper came from you. I'll verify the rest separately." He leaned back, almost smiling. "Fair enough." I had arrived prepared to prove that Vanessa had lied to my parents. Instead, I left with evidence that my father had been warned before I fell. The silence in my family had not begun after the accident. It had begun before it. That evening, my parents invited Noah and me to dinner at Magnolia House. The table had been set for 6. My mother had used the wedding china, as though delicate plates could force the conversation to remain polite. Robert sat at the head of the table. Vanessa was on his right. Aaron avoided looking at me. My father placed a 2-page statement beside my plate. "The buyer needs clarification," he said. "They need an authentic safety record. They need the sale to remain on schedule. That isn't my responsibility." His jaw tightened. "The bridal wing loan matures in 60 days. Closing allows us to pay it down. If the transaction stalls, refinancing becomes difficult." There it was. Not family legacy. Debt. Vanessa folded her hands. "No one is asking you to lie. Sign that the report reflects the general assessment you gave us." "What assessment?" "The conversations we had after the accident." "Give me the date." She blinked. "The date of the conversation in which I said the rail was safe." "Claire, it was more than a year ago." "Then give me the month." My mother sighed. "This is exactly what you do. You turn everything into an interrogation. You submitted a report under my name." "It was a template," Vanessa snapped. "A template does not inspect a staircase." Robert pushed the statement closer. "If you sign, the buyer can continue. Your wedding stays in the garden. We cover the entire event, as promised." I looked down at the signature line. My family had reduced belonging to a transaction so many times that they no longer heard themselves doing it. "Sign, and you may be married here. Stay silent, and you may remain our daughter." I picked up the statement. Vanessa relaxed. Then, I began reading. The second paragraph said the original maintenance request had been deferred, pending bridal wing completion. I had seen that phrase before. Not in the report. In Calvin's internal email, an email Vanessa had already denied receiving. I raised my eyes. "Who wrote this clarification?" "I did," Vanessa said. "Did you review Calvin Reed's maintenance warning before writing it?" "No." "Then, why did you correct the exact language used in that warning?" The room became so quiet that I heard the old clock in the hallway click into the next minute. My father looked at Vanessa. My mother's fingers tightened around her napkin. I did not pretend to know what any of them were thinking. I only knew that no one answered. I closed my pen with a sharp click and placed it on top of the unsigned statement. From now on, every discussion about my accident, the sale, my professional title, or my wedding happens in writing. "Claire," my mother whispered, "no signature will be exchanged for a place in this family." I stood and took the statement with me. Vanessa had denied ever reading the maintenance warning, but she had just revised a sentence that only someone who had read it would know needed changing. And for the first time, I was no longer asking whether my family had misunderstood what happened on that staircase. I was asking how many of them had helped bury it. Part 2. The last chance before the filing. The statement Vanessa wanted me to sign stayed on the hotel desk all night. By morning, the paper had curled slightly beneath the air conditioning vent. Her phrase remained visible near the center of the page. "Deferred pending bridal wing completion." The same wording Calvin had used in a maintenance email, Vanessa claimed she had never seen. Noah came out of the bathroom fastening his watch and stopped when he saw me staring at it. "You didn't sleep. Not enough to count. Did anyone call?" "Mother sent 6 messages. Father sent one." "What did he say?" I turned my phone so Noah could read it. "You are risking everyone's livelihood over wording." No mention of the railing. No denial that he had received the warning. No question about why a report created after my accident carried a date from before it. Just livelihoods. A useful word when someone wanted the consequences of their choices to feel like my responsibility. The hotel table was too small for the documents I needed to compare, so I moved everything to the narrow desk beneath the window. Savannah was already bright outside, the sidewalks damp from an overnight rain. Wedding tourists walked toward the historic district carrying iced coffee and folded maps. From 8 floors above them, Magnolia House looked almost peaceful. My notebook opened to a blank page. Across the top, I wrote 4 headings: document, date, access, public claim. Beneath them, I began separating what I knew from what I could only infer. The report had been created after my accident. Verified. The visible date had been changed. Verified. Revision 4.2 did not exist before the accident. Verified. Vanessa's name appeared in the author field. Verified. Robert had been notified of the railing problem before I fell. Supported by Calvin's maintenance copy, but still awaiting an independent source. Diane had requested my blank template. Verified by email. The reason Vanessa created the report remained an inference until another record connected it to the sale. My father's knowledge of the altered date remained unknown. Aaron's role in the incident at Vanessa's wedding remained unknown. That last category mattered most. Anger could make an unanswered question feel like proof. My work had taught me that the fastest way to weaken a strong case was to exaggerate it. Noah set a mug beside my hand. What can I do? The old answer rose automatically. Nothing. I've got it. It was the answer I gave when I was afraid help would become control, or when accepting help made me feel indebted. My parents had trained me to expect an invoice after every kindness. This time, I looked at the stack of paper instead. I need 3 separate sets. He pulled out the chair across from me. Tell me the rules. The first stays with me. It's the working set. I can mark it, reorder it, and use it to build the timeline. Noah nodded. The second goes into the gray document box. Only material I received legally. The report from the buyer, the emails sent to me, Calvin's copies that he voluntarily provided, and any signed statements. No originals from Magnolia House. And the third? Read. Only electronic copies in my personal account, not the university system. What do you need me to handle? The gray box. You photograph the seal whenever it changes hands. You log the time, location, and reason. You do not read the contents, add notes, or reorganize anything. His eyebrows lifted. You trust me with it, but don't want me to read it. I trust you enough to give you a narrow job and expect you to stay inside it. That may be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. Despite myself, a small laugh escaped. Then his expression settled. Claire, if someone comes after the box, you call hotel security. You don't confront anyone. What if it's Vanessa? Especially if it's Vanessa. The civil attorney I had contacted the night before returned my call just after 9. The consultation lasted less than half an hour. I explained where each document had come from and what I planned to do with it. She confirmed that I could retain material the buyer had sent directly to me and copies Calvin had chosen to provide. I could not remove records from Magnolia House, guess passwords, enter restricted systems, or manipulate a file to make its history look different. I'm not asking you to contact my relatives, I said. I understand. I'm also not hiring you to run the meeting. You're asking where the boundaries are. Yes. She identified them, recommended that I preserve the original messages, and reminded me to document the source of every item. Then, the call ended. No demand letter appeared by magic. No courtroom opened its doors. I was still the person who had to assemble the facts and decide what to do with them. By noon, the 3 sets were complete. Noah watched while I placed the paper copies into the gray box, closed the lid, and pressed the numbered tamper seal across the latch. He photographed it beside the hotel clock, wrote the time in a plain notebook, and carried the box to the room safe. The electronic copies went into a folder that could be viewed but not overwritten. A small program generated a digital fingerprint for each file, a string of characters that would change if even one page were altered. The final safeguard took longer. A scheduled email addressed to the buyer's representative, the insurer's loss control contact, and my university compliance officer. Attached were my non-reliance notice, the timeline, the source list, and the documents supporting each verified point. Delivery time: 6 in the morning on my wedding day. The message would remain unsent only if I canceled it before the deadline. My finger rested over the confirmation button. Noah stood behind me without speaking. Once the schedule was active, no missing phone, locked door, or emotional plea could make the evidence remain inside Magnolia House. I clicked confirm. The screen displayed the delivery time: 6 in the morning. For the first time since opening the forged report, my shoulders loosened. They can take my phone, I said. They can't keep the records in that house. Noah looked toward the safe. Then the box isn't their biggest problem. No. The biggest problem was that Vanessa had built her protection around the assumption that I would always give her one more private conversation. 2 days later, I met Thomas Mercer at a cafe overlooking a narrow square shaded by live oaks. He arrived carrying no medical records and made no attempt to turn the conversation into an examination. That helped. I did not need another person treating my body as the central piece of evidence. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked. "Only what you personally observed at Vanessa's wedding. No conclusions about your earlier accident? Not unless you witnessed it." "I didn't." "Then it doesn't belong in your statement." Thomas studied me for a moment, then nodded. I asked him to begin before Aaron approached. He remembered that I was using a forearm crutch and shifting weight away from my right side. He had noticed me limiting the length of my steps earlier in the reception. "Did anything about my movement suggest I was carrying it as a prop?" "No." "Could you tell whether I was fully recovered?" "I could tell that the claim was inconsistent with what I observed. That isn't the same as making a complete diagnosis." "That distinction is exactly what I need." He described Aaron taking the crutch, my loss of balance, and the position of the videographer. "Where was the camera before she touched it?" "Near the dance floor. Then the operator moved toward the staircase and aimed directly at you." "Before Aaron approached?" "Yes." My pen paused. "Did Vanessa signal him?" I saw her look toward him and make a small motion with her hand. "I can't tell you what it meant." "That's fine," Thomas continued. "Vanessa had not come toward me when I fell. Her expression changed only after he commented on my weight-bearing limitations and asked about the scar. When we finished, I turned my notes toward him. "I'll send a short statement based on this. Change anything that doesn't sound accurate. Sign only if it reflects what you remember." Thomas folded his hands around his coffee cup. "I know someone who works in commercial insurance. He could make a few calls." "No." The word came out harder than intended. He did not appear offended. "I need this reviewed through the actual transaction," I said more evenly. "Not because the groom's father knows the right person." "Understood." He stood, then hesitated. "There is one phrase you may want to ask about." "What phrase?" The videographer said it while checking his position. I was close enough to hear him. Thomas adjusted the cuff of his jacket. He called it the recovery reveal. My fingers tightened around the pen. I had never used those words. Neither had Aaron. The phrase implied a planned moment, not a joke that had gone wrong. Before leaving, Thomas said he would send his corrected statement by the end of the day. The moment he disappeared around the square, I opened my laptop and wrote to the video company. My request was narrow. I did not demand every hour of footage from Vanessa's wedding. I asked for any production notes, shot lists, or written instructions that specifically identified me or described the removal of my mobility aid. The reply arrived the following afternoon. A coordinator apologized for the delay and attached 3 pages. The second page contained a line highlighted in pale yellow. "Claire recovery reveal sisters remove crutch, spontaneous applause." Below it was a notation to keep the main camera on me and a second camera on Vanessa. Another email attached to the production sheet had come from Vanessa's business account. She described the planned scene as a symbol of the Bennett sisters moving beyond the accident. She also suggested the footage might be useful in promotional material for Magnolia House because prospective investors were sensitive to unresolved reputation issues. I read the sentence 3 times. At the wedding, Aaron had taken the crutch while the cameras waited. Afterward, my relatives had used the scene to reinforce their claim that I exaggerated my recovery needs. Now an email linked that moment to the public image of the property. My body had become part of the sales package. A knock sounded at the hotel door. Noah checked the peephole before opening it. Erin stood in the hallway. She looked past him toward me. "Can we talk?" "Here," I said. "Alone." "Noah can stay by the door." Her mouth tightened, but she entered. The hotel chair seemed too stiff for her. She sat on its edge and kept both hands pressed between her knees. I placed a printout of the shot list on the desk. Did you know this existed? She glanced down, then away. That doesn't answer the question. Vanessa said the videographer wanted a moment with all three of us. Did she tell you to take my crutch? Erin rubbed her thumb across the side of one finger until the skin reddened. She said only for a few seconds. Did you know I still needed it? You stood for pictures without it. For less than 15 seconds at a time, you knew I was still in physical therapy. She said you would stand if everyone started clapping. The room seemed to narrow around that sentence. Not because it surprised me, because of how ordinary Erin made it sound. As though applause could change a surgical restriction. As though public pressure were a form of rehabilitation. Why did you agree? Her eyes lifted. Vanessa signs my employment reviews. My apartment belongs to Magnolia House. She said if I embarrassed her at the wedding, I could find somewhere else to live. That explains the pressure. Relief flickered across her face too quickly. It does not erase what you chose. The relief vanished. I said I was sorry. No, you said it was a joke. What do you want me to do? Lose my job? Sleep in my car? I want you to tell the truth in your own words. Erin shook her head. You already have the email. The email shows what Vanessa planned. It does not show what she said to you. If I send a statement, Dad will cut me off. That decision belongs to you. You could leave my name out. That decision does not belong to you. She stared at me, as if I had changed languages. For years, my sisters had treated my silence as a resource they could divide between them. Vanessa used it to maintain authority. Erin used it to avoid consequences. I wrote the buyer representative's email address on a hotel notepad and pushed it across the desk. If you decide to correct the record, send it directly. Do not send it through me. I will not edit it, promise an outcome, or conceal your involvement. The connecting door to the adjoining room opened. Vanessa stepped through without knocking. My body reacted before my mind caught up. My back straightened. One hand moved toward the phone. Noah shifted closer to the doorway, but did not cross in front of me. Vanessa's gaze moved from Erin to the shot list. You had no right to drag her into this. I invited her to tell the truth. You're threatening her home. No. Her employment and housing are controlled by the same person who told her to take a mobility aid from someone who needed it. Erin stood so quickly the chair legs scraped the carpet. Vanessa, I didn't send anything. Go downstairs. Erin obeyed. The door closed behind her. Vanessa waited until the sound of her footsteps disappeared. You think that list proves something? It proves the scene was planned. It proves we planned a positive moment that you ruined. By falling? By refusing to let anyone see you as anything except injured. The words landed with the precision of something practiced. I turned the laptop toward her, displaying the email about prospective investors. You weren't trying to show I had recovered. You were trying to create footage that made the accident look resolved. Her jaw shifted. Magnolia House employs 37 people. You're willing to destroy their jobs because your feelings were hurt at a wedding. There it was again. The employees placed between Vanessa and accountability like human shields. Until that moment, I had focused on disproving the report. Disproving it would not be enough. If the only options were Vanessa or closure, my parents would choose Vanessa and call it responsibility. The next move had to remove that excuse. I'm not trying to close Magnolia House, I said. You have no idea what it takes to keep that place running. Then you should have no trouble proving you're indispensable. Her face did not change much, but the quiet that followed told me the sentence had reached somewhere important. Vanessa turned toward the door. You're putting every employee there at risk. She did not mean the loose railing. She meant her position. That evening, I began writing a plan for Magnolia House to operate without her. The document opened with the main staircase. Immediate closure until an independent structural inspection. Temporary redirection of guest traffic through an alternate route after that route was assessed for capacity, accessibility, and emergency use. Next came fire exits, occupancy limits, unresolved maintenance items, and accessible paths. Each issue received an owner, a deadline, and a method of verification. Records would move into a system with a permanent history of activity. Not a magical file no one could touch, but a platform that logged who uploaded, opened, replaced, or deleted a document and when. A user could change a PDF. The system would still retain the administrative record showing that the change occurred. No single operations manager would be allowed to approve her own safety deferrals. An outside manager would oversee Magnolia House for at least 6 months. Employees not involved in the records would remain. Events would be moved away from any area, awaiting clearance, rather than cancelled without review. Calvin joined a video call the next morning and challenged several deadlines. "You can't complete a full historic building structural review in 3 days," he said. "I didn't write 3. I wrote the initial inspection begins within 3. He leaned closer to the screen. "All right, keep that distinction." An independent facilities consultant reviewed the plan later that afternoon. She did not endorse my conclusions about Vanessa. I had not asked her to. She assessed only whether the proposed controls could allow most operations to continue if ownership cooperated. Her answer was yes. There would be expense, disruption, and oversight. There did not have to be collapse. At the bottom of the plan, I added a disclosure in bold. I would accept no management position, ownership share, sale commission, or consulting payment from Magnolia House. Noah read that paragraph over my shoulder. "You've spent years wanting your father to admit you could run that place better than Vanessa. Wanting him to admit it is not the same as wanting the job. You could take control and make it safe. And spend the rest of my life fixing what they refuse to own." His hand rested lightly against the back of my chair. "Are you sure?" The question hurt because part of me was not. Magnolia House had been the first building I learned to read. As a child, I knew which floorboards flexed in summer and which windows rattled before a storm. Some buried piece of me still imagined my father placing the keys in my hand and saying he should have trusted me from the beginning. That fantasy had kept me useful for too long. "I'll prove the property can be safe," I said. "I will not become the replacement system they exploit." The buyer confirmed the final due diligence meeting for 8:30 on the morning of my wedding. Our ceremony was scheduled for 11:30. Under ordinary circumstances, 90 minutes left time to close my laptop, change clothes, and walk into the garden. Nothing about the week felt ordinary. A message appeared from Vanessa. "Then there is no wedding." I did not respond to her. Instead, the agenda went to every participant: the buyer, the loss, control representative for the insurer, my parents, Vanessa, and the independent facilities consultant. 4 subjects: the origin of the report, warnings issued before my accident, current control of the records, a corrective plan. The accompanying notice was equally direct. Magnolia House had one final opportunity to withdraw the false document, correct the use of my name, transfer control of the records, and disclose the discrepancy itself. If ownership refused, the full file would be delivered to the transaction reviewers and the appropriate local inspection channels. The insurer's representative answered in writing. If the safety records could not be authenticated, the company would have to reconsider the assumptions used to price and maintain coverage. Possible consequences included mandatory corrective conditions, limits on continued coverage, refusal to renew, or an unwillingness to insure the property for a new owner. Without commercially acceptable insurance, the buyer's lender could not close the transaction. Robert called within minutes. "This is an ultimatum. The deadline comes from your sale. You know the bridal wing loan matures in less than 2 months. Yes. If closing fails, the bank may refuse to refinance us. Then your priority should be accurate records and insurability. You're using your own wedding to corner us. You scheduled the final review that morning because you expected me to choose the ceremony over the report." He said nothing. Behind him, faintly, my mother asked whether I was still on the line. Diane took the phone. "A wedding is not supposed to be a battlefield. Then stop using it as leverage. Vanessa has offered to correct the date. The date is not the only false statement. She said she would apologize. An apology does not establish who received the maintenance warnings or why my title was used." Diane lowered her voice. "Your father cannot survive a public scandal at his age." My hand tightened around the phone. He survived knowing the railing was loose. She ended the call. An hour later, The buyer forwarded a replacement agenda Vanessa had attempted to circulate. It did not identify me as the person named in the disputed report or as a senior risk professional. It described me as a relative experiencing emotional distress. I requested that the original agenda govern the meeting and that the attempt to substitute it be preserved with the transaction records. Vanessa no longer needed me to agree with her version. She only needed me absent for 90 minutes. The rehearsal dinner took place the following evening beneath strings of garden lights. Everything looked ready. White roses waited in buckets near the service hall. The quartet had left its music stands inside the parlor. My dress hung in the small dressing room beside the east garden, covered in a cloth garment bag. Noah and I checked the gray box before leaving the hotel. The seal remained intact. He photographed it beside the safe's time display, closed the door, and entered the verification into the notebook. "Come back with me as soon as dinner ends," he said. "I need to collect my dress and prescription bag. I'll come upstairs. My mother wants 5 minutes alone." "No." His answer was immediate. "Noah, she has spent 12 days helping Vanessa pressure you." "I know. Then why give her 5 minutes?" "Because some part of me still wanted my mother to choose me when no one else was watching." The admission felt too humiliating to say aloud. "We'll set a time," I said. 20 minutes. If I don't call, come back and ask the front desk to open the corridor." His mouth hardened. 10, 15, 12. Fine. At the end of dinner, Diane touched my elbow. "Come with me." The dressing room smelled of pressed linen and the lavender sachets she had used in drawers since I was a child. Vanessa stood near the vanity. Aaron remained by the door. A page lay on the counter. "Another clarification." Diane held out a pen. "Sign this, and Robert will cancel the morning meeting. The garden remains yours. No buyers, no insurer, and no outsiders on your wedding day. The meeting is not his to cancel. It can all stop. No, it can be disclosed and corrected." Vanessa stepped forward. "You've made your point. My name is still on the report. We'll remove it after closing. After someone buys the property relying on it? You know the building better than anyone." The conclusion was substantially correct. The railing detached from the wall. You fell before anyone could establish why. Calvin reported loosened anchors 3 times. Diane pushed the pen closer. "Please, let tomorrow be about you." Tomorrow had always been about what they needed me not to do. I set the pen down. No signature. The meeting continues. Vanessa's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "I'm sorry," she said. "For all of it. The wedding, Aaron, the report. I handled things badly." The words came too neatly, with no detail and no responsibility. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" Her expression flattened. Diane moved between us carrying a cup. "Enough questions. You look exhausted." Steam rose from the tea. Chamomile and honey, the same mixture she used to bring me when I was sick as a child. "You always sleep better after this," she said. The cup warmed both palms. Trust did not disappear all at once. Sometimes it survived inside a smell, a familiar room, or the muscle memory of accepting what your mother handed you. I drank less than half. The first warning was the mirror seeming farther away than it should have been. Then, the edges of the room softened. My fingers missed the counter when I tried to set the cup down. "Mother?" Someone caught my shoulder. Metal clicked near my ear. Aaron was crying. I could hear her, but could not make out the words. Vanessa's voice came from somewhere behind me. "She can't appear tomorrow looking like the perfect victim." The next sound was scissors closing. After that, memory broke into pieces too small to arrange. Noah found me because I did not call at the agreed time. Later, he told me only what he had personally done. He returned to Magnolia House, asked the front desk manager to open the corridor, and found me on the dressing room floor. He called emergency services and followed the dispatcher's instructions. He did not confront my parents, or either sister. He stayed outside the immediate area, recorded the time, and waited for paramedics. At the hospital, samples were taken. My clothes and the scissors were left for the professionals to handle. A police officer recorded the fragments I could provide and gave me a case number. I named everyone who had been inside the room. before my memory failed. Where I was uncertain, the statement said uncertain. A victim advocate sat with me, while hospital security kept the consultation corridor restricted. No one from Magnolia House was permitted inside. The physician examined me again before approving a limited video call. I was alert, able to understand the choices, and free to end the meeting whenever needed. Leaving the hospital or driving was not permitted. While Noah went to retrieve the gray box, the wedding planner called. "The florist is already unloading," she said. "The caterer has 2 trucks in the service lane, and guests from Charleston are arriving early. Diane wants me to announce that you've had an emotional episode and need privacy." No. What should I tell them? That the ceremony is postponed because of an unexpected medical situation. Nothing more. Do you want your mother to approve the language? No. This is my wedding. The words sounded strange in the hospital room. Mine. Not a reward for signing. Not a stage for Magnolia House. Not a bargaining chip. The planner repeated the message back, then promised to send it under her own name. Noah returned carrying the sealed gray box, my navy blazer, and a dark scarf. The seal had been photographed before the hotel safe was opened, with the manager present. The access time had been entered in the log. Nothing inside had been touched. At the sound of Vanessa's name through a call from the buyer, Noah turned toward the wall. His shoulders rose with one slow breath, then another. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Stand by the door." "That's all? Keep the nurse, security, the officer, and the attorney's numbers open. If I touch 2 fingers to the edge of the table, end the call." His jaw tightened. "I will not speak for you. Thank you. But no one crosses that door." The nurse helped position the camera so it showed only my shoulders, blazer, and scarf. The victim advocate remained close by, out of frame. A security officer stood farther down the corridor. On the laptop screen, the secure meeting room opened. Robert appeared at the library table in Magnolia House. Diane sat beside him. Aaron stood near the window. Vanessa entered last. Behind them came the muffled rattle of catering carts crossing the stone courtyard and a woman asking arriving guests to wait in the front hall. Vanessa's gaze settled on the gray box. Her face drained of color. I placed both hands flat on the hospital table. "I have been medically evaluated. I have completed a preliminary statement with the police, and I am participating voluntarily under supervision," I said. "The events of this morning are being handled in a separate record. They do not alter the provenance, creation dates, or authenticity of the documents on your screen." Then, I reached for the latch of the gray box. Part 3. The Audit Trail. The seal broke with a dry snap that carried through the hospital room and into the speakers of every person connected to the call. No one at Magnolia House spoke. Behind my father's chair, a catering cart rattled across the library doorway. Someone in the hall asked where the bride was. Another voice answered that the ceremony had been postponed, but the words dissolved beneath a burst of questions from arriving guests. Vanessa kept her eyes on the gray box. The buyer's due diligence director, Evelyn Brooks, appeared in a separate window on my screen. Beside her was Martin Shaw, the insurer's loss control representative. Leah Park, the independent facilities consultant who had reviewed my corrective plan, joined from her office. Evelyn adjusted her headset. "Before we begin, Miss Bennett, are you medically able to participate?" "Yes. My physician has approved a limited video conference. A nurse, a victim advocate, and hospital security are nearby. I have also completed a preliminary police statement." My mother shifted in her chair. Evelyn continued. "Are you participating voluntarily?" "Yes. Do you need any accommodation beyond the ability to stop the meeting?" "No." "Then the transaction review will proceed for the scheduled period. The medical and police matters will remain separate unless they directly affect the reliability or custody of the business records." "That is exactly what I'm requesting." The victim advocate sat several feet to my left, close enough to see me but outside the camera frame. Noah remained beside the closed door with his phone in his hand. He had not spoken since the meeting began. On my screen, Robert leaned toward the microphone. "We should postpone this until Claire is in a more stable condition." "My condition has been evaluated," I said. "The report carrying my name has not." Diane lifted one hand. "Claire, please. There are guests downstairs." I'm aware. A woman outside the Magnolia House library called my mother's name. The door opened, and a wedding coordinator appeared behind them. Mrs. Bennet, the florist needs to know whether to move the arrangements out of the sun. Several guests are asking if they should return to their hotels. Diane muted the conference. Her mouth moved quickly as she stood. Aaron followed her into the hall. Through the open doorway, I saw white flowers stacked against the wall, and two servers holding trays they no longer knew where to take. Vanessa reached across the table and closed the door. The sound of the confusion became muffled, but it did not disappear. Evelyn looked down at her notes. Miss Bennet, please identify what is inside the box and how it has been maintained. Copies of documents sent directly to me, records voluntarily provided by their lawful source, signed witness statements, and a corrective operating proposal. The originals of the electronic files remain in their source systems. I consulted counsel regarding what I could legally retain. Nothing was removed from Magnolia House, and no restricted account was accessed. The lawyer had not assembled my case, negotiated with my relatives, or entered the meeting. She had answered a narrow question about boundaries. Everything inside the box had been found, verified, and organized by me. I removed the first folder. The paper sets are copies. Their purpose is to let everyone follow the same sequence. The electronic originals are the controlling records. Martin asked, "Has the box remained solely in your possession?" No. Noah Hale maintained physical custody after I sealed it. He did not read, alter, or reorganize the contents. Each transfer was photographed, timed, and witnessed when possible. The box was stored in the hotel safe until this morning. Noah raised the custody notebook toward the camera, but did not step into the center of the frame. Evelyn said, "Please email the log after the meeting." "I will." Vanessa leaned closer to her microphone. "This is theater." Claire put papers in a box and assigned her fiancé to guard them. "The box does not establish the truth of the documents," I said. "It only helps establish that the paper copies were not changed after collection. Then stop performing and show them." I placed the disputed report beneath the hospital document camera. Its title filled the shared screen. Post-Incident Life Safety Review Magnolia House. My name appeared below it, followed by my university position. Martin read the title in silence before asking, "Did you conduct this review?" "No." "Did you authorize anyone to use your name?" "No." "Were you working for Magnolia House?" "No." "Were you acting on behalf of the university?" "No. I was never assigned, retained, or approved to provide professional services to this property." Evelyn turned toward another monitor. "Our transaction file identifies this document as a pre-incident safety assessment. It cannot be one." Vanessa folded her arms. "Because she says so." "Because the document says so." The footer appeared when I enlarged the bottom of the page. Revision 4.2. "That version of the template did not exist until 3 months after my fall," I said. "I created it for work at the university. The report is visibly dated before the accident, but its format was created afterward." Robert frowned at the screen. "How could anyone listening to this know when you made a template? They don't have to take my word for it." My university compliance notice came next. It confirmed when Revision 4.2 had been placed into professional use and that the university had received my report about the unauthorized use of my title as soon as I discovered it. "The sequence matters," I said. "The buyer contacted me 12 days ago. Within minutes of verifying that the document used my name, I issued a non-reliance notice. I then informed my employer, because the document created the appearance of a conflict of interest." Martin looked up. "What would have happened if you had remained silent?" "The university could reasonably have questioned whether I allowed my public position to endorse a private asset belonging to my parents. If anyone had been injured while the false report continued to circulate, my delay could also have damaged my professional credibility." My father rubbed one hand over his mouth. "So you escalated this to save your job." "I reported it because my job requires me not to conceal a false safety document. You could have called me first. You received 3 warnings about the railing before my accident. Calling you first had already been tested." His hand fell to the table. Evelyn asked me to continue. The properties of the report appeared on the shared screen. The visible date was manually entered, I said. The file creation date is after my fall. The author field identifies Vanessa Mercer. That does not prove I wrote every word, Vanessa said. No, it proves your account created or saved this version. That is why I requested the transaction data room audit trail. Several people on the call glanced toward Evelyn. She opened a file. For listeners unfamiliar with the term, I explained it before anyone could bury the meaning beneath technical language. An audit trail is the record behind the document. A person may replace a file, rename it, or change what appears on the page. The system still keeps a history of who uploaded it, when it was uploaded, and whether another version was replaced. Evelyn shared the transaction log. The disputed report had entered the buyer's data room through Vanessa's account. It had been uploaded less than 2 months earlier, shortly after the sale agreement entered due diligence. An earlier file with a different title had been replaced. Can the transaction log be edited by Magnolia House? I asked. No, Evelyn said. The platform is administered by the transaction provider. Can Vanessa change the upload date shown here? No. The library grew quiet enough that the background noise outside seemed louder. A guest knocked on the door. Someone asked whether transportation back to the hotels was being arranged. Vanessa ignored it. The wrong document was uploaded, she said. That is a data room mistake, not fraud. Evelyn's expression remained neutral. Who uploaded it? My account did. Was your account shared? No. Did anyone else have your password? Not to my knowledge. My sister looked toward Robert. The report came from our internal files. I believed Claire had prepared it after the accident. Then why is it dated before the accident? I asked. That may have been a formatting error. Why does it state that I inspected the staircase before I fell? Because you had looked at it before. Looking at the building where I grew up is not a professional inspection. You gave us advice constantly. Advice does not create a report, and a blank template is not consent. The email from Diane appeared next. 9 months earlier, my mother had asked for a modern safety report sample. I had sent a blank document stripped of university branding and site information. Her response remained visible at the bottom. Vanessa needs the version with all the newer sections. My mother had returned to the library during the presentation. She stopped behind her chair when the message appeared. I asked for a sample, she said. Yes. You sent it willingly. I sent an empty framework for reference. I did not send an inspection, signature, or permission to place my title on a completed report. I didn't know what Vanessa planned to do with it. I have not said you did. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than an accusation would have. The report could establish what happened, without requiring me to claim access to my mother's thoughts. A second folder came out of the box. Now we reached the condition of the staircase. Calvin's copies of the maintenance requests filled the screen one after another. Movement at the wall bracket. Loosened anchors. Recommendation to close the staircase until repair. All 3 were created before my fall. 2 carried the notation, deferred by operations. The last carried the handwritten words owner notified. Calvin's signed statement explained Magnolia House's procedure. Operations referred to Vanessa. Owner referred to Robert Bennett. My father straightened. Calvin left under bad circumstances. His opinion of you is not the evidence. He could have written those notes later. That possibility is why I looked for independent confirmation. The supplier records appeared. Replacement anchors and reinforcement materials had been ordered after my accident. The vendor's date, invoice sequence, and delivery record matched one another. The repair could not have been completed before I fell because the necessary material had not yet been ordered. Leah spoke for the first time. I reviewed the maintenance descriptions and supplier documents. They do not allow me to determine every physical condition that existed on the date of the incident. They do show that the recommended repair was not completed before the documented material order. Robert's voice hardened. Recommended repairs are postponed all the time in historic properties. Then the postponement should appear honestly in the safety record, I said. The staircase had stood for more than 100 years. So had the wall. That did not make loose anchors self-correcting. Vanessa interrupted. Claire was drinking that night. The accusation no longer struck like it had the first 100 times. It sounded tired, almost fragile beside the records. Show the evidence. You had champagne. 1 glass during dinner, several hours before the fall. You were emotionally upset. That does not attach a railing to a wall. You were already unsteady. I was unsteady because I had been directed to use a mobility aid during recovery. Martin looked toward me. Was there a professional medical instruction in effect at the time? Yes. I will not display unnecessary medical details, but I provided the relevant restriction letter to the buyer. It confirms that I was supposed to use a forearm crutch and limit unsupported standing. Evelyn confirmed receipt. Vanessa pushed back from the table. None of this proves the rail caused her fall. That question can be evaluated separately, I said. The present issue is whether Magnolia House had prior warnings, whether those warnings were disclosed, and whether a report under my name falsely stated that I had cleared the staircase. For several seconds, she had no answer. I opened the clarification Robert had placed beside my plate at dinner. The next item connects the people who denied seeing Calvin's warning to its exact language. The phrase "deferred pending bridal wing completion" appeared in the statement Vanessa wanted me to sign. Calvin's internal email used the same words. During dinner, Vanessa had said she never received that warning. Common language, she said now. Then explain why it appears in a clarification drafted specifically to correct a record you say you never saw. You're twisting wording. I'm comparing wording. A disturbance outside the library interrupted us. The door opened again. Aaron stood in the doorway while Diane spoke to someone in the hall. "Dad, the planner needs an answer," Aaron said. "People are leaving. The musicians want to know whether they'll still be paid." Robert pressed the mute button, but not before a man's voice rose from the corridor. "We were told the bride was at the hospital. Why is her sister in the library?" A second person asked whether something had happened the night before. Diane closed the door and remained outside. Robert unmuted the call. "Continue." The word sounded stripped of every social courtesy he usually used to control a room. I slid the next page beneath the camera. "This is the production sheet from Vanessa's wedding." The highlighted instruction appeared. Claire recovery reveals sisters remove crutch. Spontaneous applause. Thomas Mercer's statement followed. He had observed the videographer reposition before Aaron approached. He had also observed my restricted gait and continued need for support. Then came Vanessa's email to the production company. The planned scene was described as a symbol of the Bennett sisters moving beyond the accident and potential promotional footage for Magnolia House. Evelyn read the email twice. "You planned for Miss Bennett's crutch to be removed on camera?" she asked. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "It was supposed to be an uplifting moment. Did Claire agree?" "She knew we were filming. That is not what I asked." She had been walking without it during photographs. "For seconds at a time," I said. The production notes instructed Aaron to remove it. Vanessa turned toward Aaron. "You agreed to it." Aaron remained near the window. "You told me she would stand when everyone clapped." My sister's voice was low but audible through the conference microphone. "You told me I would lose my job and apartment if I embarrassed you." Robert stared at her. Aaron did not look at him. That statement did not absolve her. It did not make her helpless, innocent, or trustworthy. It only added a direct account of the pressure Vanessa had used. "Did Claire ask you to say that?" Robert demanded. "No." "Did she promise you anything?" "No." Vanessa pointed toward the door. "Get out." Aaron did not move. "You don't have that authority anymore," I said. My sister swung back toward the camera. "You're in a hospital trying to fire me from a property you don't own." "No. I'm going to show the owner, insurer, and buyer that keeping you in control is no longer necessary." For the first time since the meeting began, her expression changed without immediately recovering. A fist struck the library door from the outside. The wedding coordinator called for Diane again. Guests were being redirected toward the front entrance, where cars had begun blocking the service lane. Robert looked from the door to the transaction documents on his screen. Martin spoke before he could leave. "We need to address insurability." That single word stopped him. Martin placed the forged report beside the maintenance warnings in his own shared view. Commercial property coverage depends on the accuracy of material information supplied by the insured. If safety records were falsified, if known conditions were omitted, or if management cannot demonstrate reliable control of its documents, the carrier must reevaluate whether the present risk remains acceptable. My father's voice dropped. "What does reevaluate mean?" It may mean immediate corrective conditions. It may mean restricting coverage. It may mean declining renewal. It may mean that a carrier will not insure the property for a new owner until the record and physical conditions are independently reviewed. The building is insured now. Coverage existing today does not guarantee that the current terms remain available after a material discrepancy is discovered. Evelyn added, the buyer's lender requires commercially acceptable insurance as a condition of closing. My father leaned closer to the screen. If the insurer pauses, the lender pauses. Yes, Evelyn said. The bridal wing loan matures in less than 2 months. That deadline does not change our due diligence obligations. What would allow the review to continue? The question was no longer directed at me. Martin answered carefully. First, the disputed report must be formally withdrawn. Second, the use of Miss Bennett's name and title must be corrected throughout the transaction file. Third, the underlying safety conditions require independent inspection. Fourth, document control can no longer remain with anyone connected to the disputed upload until the review is complete. Vanessa stood. You cannot remove me based on a file error. Martin did not respond to her personally. Evelyn continued. The buyer would also require an operating structure capable of addressing the corrective work without relying on the person whose account uploaded the disputed report. Robert looked toward me. This is what you wanted. What I wanted was for the false document to be withdrawn 12 days ago. You prepared something. It was not a question. The final folder came out of the gray box. This is a temporary corrective operating plan. Leah shared the reviewed version. The plan did not promise that Magnolia House could remain fully open. It identified what had to stop, what could continue, and what required independent approval. The main staircase would close immediately. Alternative guest routes would be assessed before use. A structural professional would evaluate the rail connection and surrounding wall. Fire and life safety records would be reviewed. Every outstanding maintenance item would receive a responsible person, deadline, and verification step. Access to the digital record system would be separated so no operations director could approve a deferral and then alter the supporting file without another person seeing the change. An outside manager would take temporary control. Employees not connected to the disputed records would remain in their jobs where operations could continue safely. Leah addressed the meeting. I reviewed the plan for practical feasibility. It is not a guarantee of continued operation, and it does not replace inspection by the appropriate professionals or authorities. It does provide a workable framework for maintaining unaffected functions while the property is evaluated. Vanessa laughed once. You made a plan to take my job. At the bottom of the document, my disclosure appeared in bold. I would accept no ownership interest, management role, sale commission, or consulting payment. I made a plan that proves the property does not have to choose between you and collapse. You don't know the staff. I know 37 employees should not be used as a reason to keep one person in unchecked control. You think some outside manager can walk in and understand Magnolia House? Not immediately. Then your plan fails. No. It requires procedures, records, and cooperation, instead of one person claiming to be irreplaceable. Her chair struck the wall when she stepped backward. The sound reached me through the laptop speakers with startling clarity. Robert said her name. She turned on him. You know what happens if I leave. You don't even know the current booking schedule. That is a management failure, I said. Critical operations should not exist only inside one person's head. Stay out of this. My name is on the report. You put me in it. The argument might have continued until the session expired, but Evelyn stopped it. The buyer needs an ownership decision. Robert looked toward the closed library door. Beyond it, guests were gathering luggage. Vendors were asking about deposits, and the celebration he had offered in exchange for my signature was dissolving in public. What decision? He asked. Whether Vanessa Mercer will retain operational control, access to the data room, and authority over safety records during the independent review. My father's eyes moved toward Vanessa. She folded her arms. If you remove me, I walk away from all of it. No one spoke. I mean it, she said. Bookings, vendors, payroll problems, the preservation committee, all of it. Robert glanced at the corrective plan. The outside manager can handle those? After a structured handover, Leah said. Not instantly. Staff cooperation and access to accurate records will be essential. What if Vanessa refuses the handover? Then ownership must recover access through existing company controls and document what is unavailable. Vanessa stared at him. Choose carefully. He lowered his head. A message arrived in the meeting chat from Evelyn. It contained a transaction portal link and a written list of the actions required before due diligence could continue. Formal withdrawal of the report. Suspension of Vanessa's data room access. Transfer of safety record control. Independent inspection. Appointment of temporary operations management. Robert read the document. His first attempt to speak failed. He cleared his throat. Claire, if I do this, will you tell the insurer the house is safe? No. His head lifted. I will tell the truth. The house requires inspection. The records require review. The operating plan creates a path forward, not a false clearance. You won't help me close? I have already helped you more than the situation required. What do you want? The old answer would have been recognition. A place at the table. The keys. A sentence, acknowledging that I had been right and Vanessa had been wrong. What came out was simpler. My name removed. The report withdrawn. The warnings disclosed. Vanessa separated from operational control. No more private communication about the accident or sale. Any future contact with me happens in writing. And Magnolia House? It is yours to repair, sell, or lose. His face tightened. You can run it. I will not. You built this whole plan to protect employees, guests, and my professional record. Then take the position. No. The refusal passed through the meeting like a physical object. For years, everyone in that library had relied on the same assumption. Eventually I would step in, clean up the damage, and accept usefulness as a substitute for respect. That option no longer existed. Robert opened the portal link. The buyer watched him complete the owner authorization. Martin remained connected. Leah took notes. No one applauded or congratulated him for doing what should have been done before the meeting. His electronic signature appeared beneath the suspension directive. Vanessa's account was disabled from the transaction data room. Her authority over safety records and operations was suspended pending review. The disputed report was marked withdrawn and unreliable. A notice correcting the use of my name was sent to every transaction participant. Vanessa stood very still. Then her phone began vibrating on the library table. Once, twice, again. She looked down at the screen but did not answer. Evelyn confirmed that the account access had been revoked. Martin said the insurer would issue written corrective conditions by the end of the day. Leah agreed to coordinate with the outside management firm, but stated that she would not assume control herself. The buyer did not promise to close. Due diligence remained open. The lender remained uncertain. The house had been given a possible route forward, not a rescue. Vanessa reached for the laptop. You think this is over? No, I said. I think your control is. The conference timer showed 12 minutes remaining. 2 fingers pressed briefly against the table, not the emergency signal at the edge, but a reminder to myself that the meeting was nearly done. Evelyn asked whether I had anything further related to the transaction. Yes. My written notice appeared on the screen. The events of this morning are documented separately through medical and police channels. I will not bargain over that process, and I will not withdraw my statement in exchange for changes to the sale. Diane entered the library in time to hear the sentence. Her face was pale, and a white rose petal clung to the sleeve of her dress. Claire, she said, we need to talk privately. No, I'm your mother. That does not make this conversation private. Her eyes moved toward the insurer, buyer, and consultant. Please don't do this in front of strangers. The false report was sent to strangers under my name. I was trying to calm you last night. The police will determine what the evidence supports. I brought you tea. I know. You were exhausted. I know what I remember, and I know what I do not. I have already given both to the officer. Her mouth opened, then closed. Nothing she said during that meeting could restore access to me. Aaron stepped into view behind her. I sent my statement, she said. Evelyn checked another screen. It has been received. We will preserve it. Aaron looked toward me. I'm sorry. The sentence carried more detail than Vanessa's had, but it still did not create an obligation. I heard you, I said. Will you talk to me later? Not now. When? When I decide whether contact is safe. She lowered her eyes. The meeting ended at 10:12. The screen went dark. For several seconds, the hospital room held only the low hum of the ventilation system and the distant squeak of a cart in the corridor. Noah remained at the door. The anger in his face had not vanished, but he had kept his promise. He had not interrupted, threatened anyone, or turned my evidence into his confrontation. The victim advocate asked, "Do you want a break before the officer returns?" Yes. My hands had begun to shake. Not while Vanessa argued. Not while Robert signed. Only afterward, when the structure I had held upright for 90 minutes no longer needed me. The nurse lowered the laptop screen. Noah moved closer but stopped an arm's length away. "Can I touch you?" I nodded. His hand settled over mine. He did not tell me I had won. That would have been too clean. My wedding had been postponed. A police investigation had begun. Magnolia House's sale remained uncertain. The people who raised me had watched my professional identity being used as a shield and asked me to protect the shield. What changed that morning was not the past. It was their access to my future. The toxicology results arrived later through the hospital portal. They documented a sedating substance that had not been prescribed to me. The police requested a fuller interview after my discharge. Security records, the dressing room access log, and the physical evidence were collected through official channels. I did not conduct that investigation myself. Whenever someone asked what I believed had happened, the answer remained the same. I will tell you what I remember. I will not invent the missing pieces. Vanessa contacted me through email 3 times during the following week. The first message accused me of destroying her career. The second claimed Robert had acted under pressure. The third offered to correct the report publicly if I described the dressing room incident as a misunderstanding. None received a reply. Diane sent daily messages until I instructed her in writing to stop. After that, every communication went through a separate address used only for necessary matters. Erin sent a longer statement. She acknowledged taking my crutch at Vanessa's wedding, knowing I still needed it, and agreeing because Vanessa controlled her job and apartment. She also described the conversation in the dressing room before I became disoriented. Her statement became one piece of the police file. It did not become a bridge back into my life. Robert wrote once, "The house may survive. I hope that matters to you." My response contained one sentence, "The truth surviving matters more." Magnolia House closed the main staircase immediately. Several events moved to other rooms. 2 were postponed. The outside manager retained most of the employees while the independent review continued. The insurer did not cancel coverage on the spot. It issued conditions, deadlines, and reporting requirements. The buyer extended due diligence rather than closing on the original date. Months passed before the property could be sold. The final price was lower than my father had expected. Repair costs, management fees, and unresolved risks reduced the value. The proceeds were enough to address the approaching loan, but the profit that had justified everyone's silence never materialized. Vanessa never returned to operational control. Her name disappeared from the management page on Magnolia House's website. The outside manager rebuilt the record system, and every safety deferral required approval from more than one person. The criminal matter followed its own slower course. Interviews were taken, records were reviewed. Charges related to the dressing room incident were eventually filed, but no courtroom result arrived quickly enough to function as an ending. I stopped waiting for one. A verdict could assign legal responsibility. It could not decide who was permitted near me. 6 weeks after the meeting, Robert requested that I attend the formal handover at Magnolia House. The new manager needed clarification about the corrective plan, and I agreed to answer questions once. The meeting occurred in the garden rather than the library. My hair had grown into a short, uneven crop. The scar above my ear had faded. A forearm crutch still supported my right side on longer walks. Robert arrived carrying the old brass key ring. I recognized every key. The front entrance. The office. The wine cellar. The garden gate. The small room beneath the stairs where maintenance records had once been kept in metal cabinets. He placed the ring on the table between us. The manager says the plan came from you. Yes. You know the building better than anyone. I know its risks. Take the keys. The metal rested on the white tablecloth, catching sunlight. As a child, I had imagined that ring in my hand. Possession had seemed like proof that I belonged. Later, management had seemed like proof that my father respected my competence. Now the keys looked like what they had always been. Responsibility without repair. A problem offered as an inheritance. You need someone you can trust, Robert said. You need a system that does not depend on trust. Claire. The outside manager has authority. The insurer has reporting requirements. The records have independent oversight. That is safer than handing everything to another daughter and calling the problem solved. You are not another daughter. The sentence might once have opened every locked door inside me. It arrived years too late. I'm not Vanessa's replacement. No one said you were. You offered me her keys after ignoring my warnings and using my work when it protected the sale. Whatever name you give that, I'm not accepting it. His gaze dropped to the key ring. What happens to this place means nothing to you. It means something. It no longer means everything. The new manager approached from the veranda with a folder beneath her arm. I slid the keys toward her. They belong with the role. She accepted them. Robert did not try to stop her. After answering the operational questions, I left through the garden gate. Noah waited outside, leaning against his car, but not watching the entrance as though he expected to rescue me. He looked at my empty hands. You gave them back? They were never mine. 3 months later, our wedding took place in a public garden beneath live oaks and early autumn sunlight. There were no promotional cameras, no buyer representatives, and no property negotiations hidden beneath the guest list. Thomas and his wife attended. Maya came from Atlanta. Calvin sat near the back in a navy suit that appeared older than the courthouse. The new manager of Magnolia House sent flowers but did not attend. My parents were not invited. Neither sister stood beside me. Noah waited at the far end of the path, while a small group of people rose from their chairs. The crutch rested securely against my forearm. My hair was still short enough for the breeze to move every strand. The officiant met me at the beginning of the aisle. Would you like someone to walk with you? She asked. For one breath, the old garden at Magnolia House returned to me, the locked rooms, conditional invitations, the signature line placed beside my plate. Then the image passed. No, I said. I'll walk myself. My steps were slower than the music. No one hurried me. No one reached for the crutch. No one applauded to prove I could stand without it. At the end of the path, Noah held out his hand and waited until I chose to take it. The distance behind me was not long. It was simply the first one I had crossed, without asking my family for permission to arrive.